This is Mike Reed with cEntellect, and welcome to this week's proprietary research analysis. This week's topic is ethanol. Ethanol is probably the most controversial of all energy commodities. Love it or hate it, what I want to do in this week's research piece is kind of walk through 4 points about ethanol that may not be well understood. The first point is ethanol is an oxygenate and it's an octane enhancer. And so if we don't use ethanol, we have to find an alternative. We don't currently have a viable alternative to ethanol. The second point is miles per gallon. There's a myth out there that using ethanol substantially lowers miles per gallon. I'm going to argue miles per gallon are largely unchanged, and if done correctly, miles per gallon actually go up. We're going to talk about the reasons why that is. The third thing I'm going to talk about is subsidy mechanisms. There's kind of a notion out there that the ethanol complex has survived under tremendous subsidies. I'm going to argue that's probably not the case. Yes, we have a mandatory renewable fuel standard, but that leads me into the fourth point, which is economics. The economics of the mandatory fuel standard are really forcing the consumers to make an economic decision, not an uneconomic decision. Let's go ahead and explore all four of these in a little bit more detail. Let's get started first with talking about where we've been just in the last 5 years with ethanol. The first point I want to make is ethanol production over the last 5 years has grown at a compounded annual growth rate of 5.6%. And ethanol production now is about 1.1 million barrels a day. To compare that to something, let's compare it to gasoline at about 9.5 million barrels. So if you think about the gasoline and ethanol combined complex, we're now at about 10.2% ethanol, and we're at about 89.8% gasoline. The takeaway from this is ethanol is a huge business, and it's only continuing to grow. Back to the first point on oxygenate versus octane enhancer. What does an oxygenate do? It puts oxygen into the gasoline, it allows gasoline to burn cleaner, and it lowers our smog NOx emissions from a gasoline burning engine. So that's what an oxygenate does. It makes gasoline engines burn cleaner. The octane enhancer allows gasoline engines to run at a higher compression ratio, which makes them more efficient from a miles per gallon standpoint or from a power standpoint. So that's what it does combined. So you say, well, what can we replace it with? We really have four alternatives. The first is MTBE. It's a petrochemical. Yes, we did that through 2006, but we ran into groundwater contamination problems and was banned in the US. MTBE has not gone away. It's still very common in Europe. It's very common in South America. The second is we can use methanol, which is not a grain alcohol like ethanol is. It's a wood alcohol. Methanol is commonly used in Asia. The third thing we could use is use derivatives of it, which is ETBE and TAME. But my point is, we're going to have to use one of these if you don't use ethanol. So we don't have a viable alternative today for an oxygenate and an octane enhancer. Now the octane enhancer is going to spill over to miles per gallon. In 2007, the University of North Dakota teamed with Minnesota State University and did a very rigorous research study. What they did is they bought 4 production cars off the line. Only one was set up for flex fuel, so these were not modified cars. And they started adding ethanol in increments of 10%, and they'd calculate the miles per gallon, another 10%, calculate miles per gallon. And then when this check engine light came on, they increased it another 5% increments until the engine quit running. And what they found from these 4 vehicles is on average, if you use 23% ethanol blend, so E23, your miles per gallon actually went up 3%, not down. You say, well, why is this? It's true that alcohol has 1/3 less BTUs per gallon than gasoline. So how in the world can a much lower BTU threshold cause miles per gallon to go up? And the answer is in the heat vaporization, or the latent heat vaporization. Alcohol dramatically cools and removes heat. So if you put alcohol into the combustion chamber of engine, it dramatically lowers the temperature of that combustion engine, which dramatically increases the mass density of what you're injecting, which dramatically lowers the heat rate of the engine, allowing more energy per BTU to be consumed. Today, we have ethanol standards set at E10 and we're transitioning to E15. Some flex fuel vehicles can go up to E85. I think my point is the optimal amount of ethanol is not E10, it's not E15, it's not E85, it's something around E23. Ethanol is actually a superior engine fuel than gasoline. This is why race cars run on ethanol. They don't run on gasoline. The engines run cooler, run at much higher compression ratios. In closing on this point, an alcohol design engine is 40% efficient. That is, 40% of the energy makes it to the rear wheels. A gasoline engine is only 25% as efficient, much less efficient than an alcohol-based engine. Let's move on and talk about the subsidy mechanisms embedded in ethanol. There is no tax credits with ethanol, and there haven't been any tax credits for a number of years. The only mechanism that we really have that's material, and let me stop there, we have some immaterial mechanisms associated primarily with the midstream infrastructure to deliver ethanol, but it's not material. What is material is we have a renewable fuel standard that mandates X% of ethanol by Y year. But that's not technically a subsidy because it doesn't have impact on the federal budget or tax revenues. The RFS uses a mechanism called a Renewable Identification Number, or RIN, and RINs are not well understood. What happens is you're a gasoline blender that has to blend to meet the RFS quota. You have three choices to meet the quota. The first is you can blend ethanol in. The second is you can buy third-party RINs, and it qualifies as being equivalent to blending in ethanol, or you can do a combination of the both. And the takeaway here, when you look at wholesale gasoline prices compared to wholesale ethanol prices, is wholesale gasoline prices are considerably higher than wholesale ethanol prices. So the RFS is making the consumer forcing an economic decision, not an uneconomic decision. Next thing I want to talk about is kind of the economics of the cost structure of ethanol. Since 2013, production's averaged about $1.62 a gallon. Wholesale prices average about $1.73. So the ethanol producers are profiting about 11 cents a gallon, about 6.5% net income before tax. This is not a huge money business. In closing, I want to come back to the original 4 points. We don't have an alternative to lowering smog and increasing the octane of an engine other than ethanol. The second is if ethanol done correctly is actually superior fuel to gasoline miles per gallon unchanged, or could conceptually go up. Subsidy mechanisms are probably not what you think they are, other than the RFS remains in effect. And in closing, because ethanol is 15% cheaper than gasoline since 2013, that RFS is forcing the consumer to make an economic decision. For this and much more information, please visit us at cEntellect.com.